Thank you all for being here. Thanks for coming to the final speaker in the 30 Years of Globe series. We are so lucky to have Ann Lewis with us here today, and she is the PI on the MacroBlitz project. And she's going to be talking about that today. She's also an educator, an explorer, and she's the executive director of the South Dakota Discovery Center. So we are just absolutely thrilled to have her here today. Thank you, Ann, for being here. I'll pass it off to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bree, and welcome everyone. Welcome everyone watching now, as well as those of you who are watching remotely after the fact. Let's just go ahead and jump right in. So do see that comment from, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Athanasius. So thank you for being a MacroBlitz fan, and hopefully you'll learn more about it. Just also some context. I'm traveling, so I'm on one screen. So Bree, just interrupt me if there's a question and I can come back to the main screen and we can talk about it. All right. You should be seeing my presentation loading. Is that correct?
Yes.
I can't. Okay, great. Thank you. So, as Bree said, I'm the executive director of the South Dakota Discovery Center in Pierre, South Dakota. I'm the PI, the project lead on the MacroBlitz project, which was funded by National Geographic, and that makes me a National Geographic explorer as well. I'm also a Globe partner. I do that. I've been a partner since 2015, so coming up 10 years. So I've been part of Globe for 10 of the 30 years, and it's been a really awesome partnership. I've really enjoyed the people I've worked with and the work I've done, and very excited to talk about MacroBlitz as a Globe adjacent activity. A little bit about MacroBlitz, if you're not familiar with it. Our mission is to inspire and empower people to find and photograph aquatic macroinvertebrates and upload their photos to iNaturalist for science and for learning. That's a lot of words, and so let's unpack some of them, starting with the concept of aquatic macroinvertebrates. And so an aquatic macroinvertebrate is an organism without a backbone. That is the invertebrate part that lives some or all of its life in water, and we're specifically interested in freshwater. That's the aquatic part. And this organism is between micro and mega sized, usually smaller than 2 inches, but not so tiny that you need a microscope to see it. That's the macro part of it. So macro refers to its size. iNaturalist, if you are not familiar with it, it's an online social platform for uploading geolocated photos or sound recordings. With MacroBlitz, we're mostly interested in the photos. Macros tend to be pretty quiet. And our photos that we're taking are of wild and natural organisms, not captive and cultivated. Again, usually not an issue with macros. But, if you do have a tank in your classroom or whatever, you could certainly upload those. You just have to photos of those. You would just have to annotate them as captive and cultivated. I said our mission is to inspire. So let's go ahead and get started with some inspiration. MacroBlitz was funded by National Geographic, and they are all about the sizzle to make it exciting and to invite you and inspire you to go out and do this. So let's hear from a Canadian National Geographic explorer, Dalal Hanna, and why she thinks macroinvertebrates and MacroBlitz are important.
Freshwater macroinvertebrates are these incredible tiny creatures that play a big role in the functioning of ecosystems. They're the base of many food chains and really good indicators of the general health of freshwater systems. My name is Dalal Hanna. I'm a Canadian National Geographic explorer and freshwater conservation scientist. My research brings me into freshwater systems to collect all kinds of information, but some of my most favorite information to collect is macroinvertebrate information. Because macroinvertebrates are really cool. They nest into the sand and thrive in freshwaters throughout the world. And they are excellent indicators of overall freshwater health. I got involved with the MacroBlitz project because I think macroinvertebrates are this awesome, sort of secret treasure hiding in the streams and rivers that I'd love for more people to get the chance to connect with. These tiny insects make their homes on the rocks, leaves, and branches at the bottom of streams and rivers. There are so many different kinds of them, each with their special features and skills. And when you stop and take the time to get a closer look, you realize just how wonderful they are. But unfortunately, the abundance of macroinvertebrates is declining. And although we know that this is a problem we need to try to solve, scientists can barely keep track of what's going on. So to me, MacroBlitz is a way to address that. It's a way for everyone to get involved, to help document what's happening to macroinvertebrates around the world so that we can find ways to protect them.
A beautiful gills! Look at its gills! It's awesome!
I've always loved freshwaters, but as an educator and a parent, my understanding of just how important they are has deepened. We need to protect them and all the beautiful creatures that inhabit them, including the small but mighty macroinvertebrates. So come on, join us. Find your local stream, soak in its beauty, flip a rock, take a picture, upload it to iNaturalist and MacroBlitz. This collaborative effort has so much to teach us all.
So very inspirational. I've seen that video dozens of times, and it still makes me just want to run right out and start macroblitzing. Some things to know about macroblitz before you begin, and this is particularly relevant to a globe audience, is that it's additive. So it fits with other aquatic macroinvertebrate monitoring projects, regardless of the protocol or the monitoring equipment. Globe, if you do any sort of freshwater macroinvertebrate monitoring, and we could just hop over there real quick to take a look at the protocol on the Globe website. It's based on the protocol is based on a rapid watershed assessment protocol that was developed by the EPA. I'm trying to remember when it was developed, but for most volunteer aquatic macroinvertebrate monitoring programs, they're very much about this protocol or a version thereof to assess water quality. And to the point where you need to, this is the Globe data sheet. They're very interested in the phylum, class, or order, and the family, genus, or species, if known. That's actually a lot for an educator who's doing this protocol maybe once a year, because identifying aquatic macroinvertebrates is, it's a special skill. It's not necessarily something everybody gets expertise in quickly. And so that was one of the reasons we developed MacroBlitz, is to kind of take that requirement and for your data to be useful out, that ability to identify accurately. So going back to our idea that this is additive, if you are a aquatic macroinvertebrate monitoring expert, you can still MacroBlitz. If you are a total newbie, you can still MacroBlitz. It's just taking the picture and uploading it to iNaturalist. Identification does come into play a little bit. We'll talk about that in a moment, but it's not essential. You can take a picture of something and you don't know what it is, and you can upload it, and it's still part of the MacroBlitz project, and it's still useful data. It's focused on biodiversity, not water quality. And I touched on that we're just documenting what's there. We're not trying to get a representative sample size in a representative location. What's there? That's the question we're trying to answer. And we're not just a project on iNaturalist, we're a community. So we have a Google Classroom. I ask people to join the project on iNaturalist, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. So you can get the journal announcements and respond and have conversations about that. So yeah, and I just talked about all that. Forgot that slide was in there. All right, let's get into the weeds, appropriately enough, about MacroBlitz. Now that you've had the overview, starting with finding aquatic macroinvertebrates. And so I strongly encourage you, if you are new to this, you go join the Google Classroom. And I will say parenthetically, you have to use a personal Gmail to join our Google Classroom. And it has something to do with domain compatibility. So even if you're like me, your work email is actually a Google platform, you're using, it looks like the interface looks like Gmail, it still has to be a personal Gmail. We're using the cheap version of Google for the classroom. I think that we're not paying them enough to allow all kinds of different domains to use ours. Anyway, onward. So once you're in the classroom, I encourage you to go review the module of Get Ready and Gear Up, find macroinvertebrates, the habitat types, and how to collect macroinvertebrates. We'll touch on all of these, but the modules go into more depth. So first thing you need to do, of course, is you need to find your site. And your site needs to be safe, meaning that a lot of both in the water and out of the water, you don't want to be near a busy road. Especially if you're bringing a group with you, you don't want to make sure that the site is shallow enough that if it's flowing water, it's at or below your knee. And the faster the water, the lower it should hit on your leg. Just go ahead and check it out before you actually bring folks there. You want to make sure it's accessible. How are you going to get there? And this kind of also goes into legal a little bit, but how are people, do you have to cross private property to get there? How are people with limited mobility going to get there? And then you want to make sure it's legal for you to be there to collect and take pictures of aquatic macroinvertebrates. And at the very least, if you're on public land, you should inform the landowner or the land manager. Absolutely get permission if you're on private land. You need to know, do you need a permit or a license? For those in the US, I will say absolutely. If you're going into a national park, you need a permit. Don't try this without getting a permit. In this US state of Pennsylvania, you actually need a fishing license to collect, even if you're returning them, even the macros, just to take their pictures. You need a fishing license. In my home state of South Dakota, you are allowed to collect macroinvertebrates for your own personal use, and that includes taking pictures and uploading them to iNaturalist. However, if I wanted to take one and preserve it in a sample, I would need a research permit to do that. So find out what the rules are before you go out, especially if you're bringing a group with you. Let's talk a little bit about gear. Like I said, we're sort of gear agnostic, and the list that I'm giving you here is just more the kinds of gear rather than this is what you absolutely must have. So the data is replicable across time and location. So we'll just kind of run through the list of the kinds of gear that I recommend. Something to collect the macros out of the water and hold them while they are on land. That's these nets and this collapsible tub. I like the collapsible ones because they're easier to transport. Something to pick up the macros out of the tub so you can look at them. And for that, I use a spoon and a pipette. I don't use forceps. Some programs do. I don't want to squish my macros. I get very attached. Something to take photos. We'll talk more about photography in a minute. Something to isolate them. And for that, we use a Petri dish. A lot of programs will use cups or ice cube trays. Those are all fine, perfectly appropriate. I like the Petri dishes because when you're taking the photos, you can get up close enough to the macro. You want to isolate them because you only want one macro in the photo at a time. Something to measure them. Again, this is nice, not necessary. You could certainly have a ruler in the photo. I like Write in the Rain index cards, and those aren't universally available. I know them, but just an index card where you know the scale slipped underneath your Petri dish. This particular one is 6.35 millimeters square, and Write in the Rain is simply a brand of water resistant paper. So you can keep using it over and over. So, and something to magnify. Although I said macros are visible with the naked eye, some of them do get pretty tiny. And so if you're taking its picture, it's depending on the make and model of your phone, it's good to have a magnification option. And then equipment and gear to be comfortable and safe. Like, for example, I like to bring a gardening stool with me because sitting on the ground, first of all, it's easier on the vegetation. You don't inadvertently sit in poison ivy. That's one of the things by the way, you should check on your site. So moving on to habitat. There are two main kinds of habitat that you will be sampling, either lentic, still or slow moving waters, or lotic, flowing waters. Globe scientists prefer the lotic. Not everybody has access to a stream or a shallow river. So if all you have is a wetland or a slough, I actually think those are, personally, for iNaturalists perspective, it's all water, it's all good, it's all documenting the habitats that are supporting these organisms. We haven't done a big push to talk about the threat to aquatic macroinvertebrates, but there's what was it, the bug apocalypse? There was a book that came out several years ago just talking about the concerning decline of all insects. Insect apocalypse, that's what it was. And this is helping contribute information about that. Anyway, collecting. Let's talk very briefly about collecting. I'm going to go bring my show Dalal again, talking about how to collect macros. And we call this protocol turn and churn. So I'm going to bring up Dalal.
And we can't hear audio right now if there's
Oh.
words to be hearing.
Can't hear the audio. All right. All right, let me go back and.
You could always narrate over it.
Okay. Somehow share the system audio got turned off. Okay. Let me go ahead and try this again. Thank you for letting me know. Okay. Could you hear the audio on the previous one?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Kind of branch in the water is like prime.
Let me start it over.
This kind of branch in the water is like prime invert habitat. So I'm just gonna give it a good rub, allowing the current to have whatever comes downstream flow into it. And I'm gonna get to see what's living on this branch, and I'm sure there's a lot. So I just give it a nice rub. Anything that comes off of it goes into my net. At the same time, I can also rub the rocks that are around. They're also prime habitat. I pick up some rocks off the bedrock, give them a good rub. Rub the sediment at the bottom of the stream, keeping my net right here so that it catches anything that comes off these rocks. And then I swoop my net up, and I got to make sure to swoop it up right into the current so that nothing comes out. Oh my goodness! Woo!
Dalal is a delight. So that was just how literally sticking the net in the water and moving things around, turning rocks over, churning up the sediment, letting everything flow into the net. The same for collecting in lentic systems, and I'll just narrate this. So Bree, let me know if this doesn't have a sound. I won't stop sharing. I'll just narrate it because this
Okay.
is my video.
Collect macros with jab
We
and
can hear
sweep.
it.
Okay.
Start by rinsing out your tub. Collect a little bit of water to hold your macros. With a big net, jab along the bottom, then sweep it up out of the water. Turn your net into the tub. You may have to turn your net inside out. Gently wipe or rinse the net to remove any clinging macros. With a small net, start at the base of the vegetation and jab your way upwards. Sweep the net out of the water, turn it into the tub. Collect macros with jab and sweep. Start by rinsing out your tub. Collect a little bit of water to hold your macros.
Sorry about that.
With a big net, jab
thing
along the bottom, then sweep.
Okay. Stop sharing for a moment.
Turn your net into the tub. You may have to turn your net inside out. Gently wipe or rinse the net to remove any clinging macros.
All right. Now I have to find my. All right. So I'm going to stop right there and try to find the Zoom and see. There's some. Are there any messages we should looking at?
There's
Okay,
been a lot of positive comments about trying to find some macroinvertebrates. There haven't been any direct questions yet. Would you like to pause for questions and see if anyone?
Yeah, let's do that. I've been yammering at you for about half an hour. So
Okay, cool. So if anyone has a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question to Anne. I will start with a question just so you guys can collect your thoughts a little bit. This is a little bit of a silly question, and I would not normally think of this as a deeply technical word, but the word jab. It seems to kind of make sense. So you're kind of sticking your hand in and you want to kind of brush the floor, I guess, if you can, of the freshwater area and then come up through the water.
yes. Yeah, I use the word jab, and for those whose English is your second or third or fourth language, it has the connotation of putting a little bit of force. Obviously you're not pounding, but you want to kind of dislodge, because there are some kinds of macroinvertebrates. They're described as clingers. So they hold on very tightly either to their rock or to their vegetation. And so you have to kind of give them a little bit of a poke, kind of boom. And, obviously you're not going to pound but just a little bit of energy. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of a shove. Yeah,
Yeah.
like how you explain that. That's
Yeah.
very clarifying.
Just as we move into the next section, if you could put what country you're from, because this does have an impact. I'm seeing people that I'm assuming are not in North or South America.
I think we definitely have one person from Greece.
Nice.
Athanosis.
Yeah.
Ireland. Wow.
Oh, okay. Because
Argentina.
Nice. Hello. Buenos dias. Um, yeah, MacroBlitz was developed for North and South America, Philippines. And so those of you who are not in the US or in that world, which looks like a lot of you, that part of it about joining the project won't be relevant because we don't have an international iNaturalist project yet. And I'll talk about why in a moment. All right, let me go back and we can continue on our way. I will go ahead and start sharing my screen again. All right, so you should be seeing photographing macroinvertebrates. All right,
That's right.
This will be relevant to you. So just to recap that the thing that the value proposition of MacroBlitz is to take the photo of the aquatic macroinvertebrate and upload it to iNaturalist. That's what we're bringing to the party that nobody else is doing at this point, at least not in the same systematic way. So when you're taking your photographs, you have to remember that you want a photo that has enough of the organism's features that it's identifiable to that order or gene or order or family level, but definitely class. And so we do have that in mind, but it's totally okay not to know what it is. Totally okay. You just need to make sure that your photo is close up enough and has enough detail, like with numbers of legs, are there gills, length of antenna. So, and I'm speaking specifically mainly of the arthropods. Just get up close and clear. We're not worried about composition. We are worried about lighting, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But some of your photographic skills, don't matter. Some really do.
And just before you go on, we did actually have a question come in. Is it okay if I ask it?
Please.
The question is, where do the invertebrates usually live? Are they at the bottom of the water, or are they swimming actually everywhere?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's go back and look at those two photos that I kind of zipped through. Back up here, I'm just going to go ahead and stop, hit the escape here. See if I can't go back up here to the habitat. Okay, so in these photos, and hopefully you're seeing the two illustrations of photos.
Yep.
Of habitats. So in the lentic system, there are several different places you're going to look. You'll look at the surface. You'll have some on the surface. You'll have some in the water column, like this water boatman here. You'll have some clinging to vegetation, and then you have some down in the sediment. So in the slow systems, it can be anywhere from the surface to the sediment. In the fast moving systems, because the water is moving quickly, generally you don't find things either on the surface or in the water column. They're usually clinging onto rocks or vegetation or embedded into the sediment at the bottom. So that's why you saw Dalal when she was looking for critters. She was turning rocks over. She was rubbing them. She was, taking sticks and trying to rub things off the stick. And in the other one, in the lentic, the jab and sweep, you were just kind of shaking things off either out of the sediment or along the vegetation and just kind of scooping it up, and whatever was there on anything from the sediment onto the surface would get brought to the net. So does that help? Any follow-up questions on that?
That kind of helps me quite a bit. So basically, if you thought of yourself being in a river that was moving super fast and you wanted to maybe not be flowing down the river anymore, you might grab onto a rock, or you might grab onto some vegetation on the side. or even try to stick your feet into the ground.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and in a slow system, you could, the urgency isn't necessarily there. You could kind of hang out anywhere.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. That's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, if you think about the requirements, what happens in a habitat? There's feeding, there's reproduction, and then there's shelter, camouflage, protection. The habitat needs to offer all of those. In a lentic system, you can swim around to find food. You can swim after your food. You can swim after your mate. You can swim in and out of vegetation. In a lotic system, you can't, because as soon as you let go, I mean, these things are pretty tiny. They're rare. If you find something, well, there's the megaloptera, and they're usually pretty big, but most things are about an inch. And if you think about something that even we think would be a gently flowing stream, if you're an inch long and you weigh just mere grams,
Mm-hmm.
that's like a whitewater. You're going to hang on and hope that food comes by you, and you're going to kind of cling and kind of, well, you don't reproduce at the lymph. Most of these aquatic insects are at the, I say, nymph or larva. I sort of mush the words together and call them lymphs, and they're not lymphs. Nymphs or larva stage, so they're not really worried about reproduction. And even in the lentic systems, a lot of them are in that larval nymph stage. They're in the lentic systems. That's where you find the adult aquatics, mainly beetles and some hemipteras. The hemiptera is actually, in English, I swear, true bug, and which sounds weird because, like, is everything else a fake bug? Yeah, it's like, no, it's, anyway, it is what it is. So yeah, so that's why you see these adaptations to the different systems, and that's going to be direct where you're going to go look for your critters.
Awesome. I think we do have a follow-up question from Jessica. Uh,
Yeah,
she asks, what magnitude approximately are we talking about that they would have?
size.
Yeah, Jessica, would you like to clarify that question a little bit?
Sorry. Yes, I mean size. What
Yeah.
approximately?
Um, they're generally from about the smallest you can really reasonably capture with a cell phone is about 6.35 millimeters, a quarter of an inch for those of us in the US, up to about 2.5, 3 centimeters, slightly larger than an inch, again, for the folks in the US. So you can get smaller. And if you have good photographic equipment, you can capture them down to, just a few millimeters. It's really hard though, because as we'll look in a moment, these organisms, when you pull them out of the water, they're still alive and they're still moving. And so getting a picture of them can be challenging because, even though they're in a drop of water, to them, that's plenty of space if they're tiny to zip around. So you
Okay,
don't
I
need a,
mean if they are bigger, you don't consider them macroinvertebrates anymore. Is it?
uh, oh yeah, it depends on the, on the organism. If something is really big, it probably has a backbone because it's not efficient for it to have an exoskeleton. So the largest macroinvertebrates that I'm aware of, and again, I'm in North America mainly, are the megalopteras, and they're probably about 4 to 5 centimeters.
So could we try, like, would that be like bigger than your thumbnail or smaller than your thumb? Like, how can we tag that to something that we can all understand?
Yeah, if you think about, am I still sharing? Did I turn off my sharing?
You're not sharing at this moment.
Okay. So anyway, if you think about your digit of your knuckle,
Mhm.
so a big macroinvertebrate would be about the length of your pointer finger.
Okay.
And then most of them will be about between the two knuckles. A small one will be about half your nail size. And getting good pictures of anything smaller than half your nail size with the kinds of photographic equipment most of us have, and most of us, that's a cell phone. It's really challenging to get something that small. So hopefully that helps in terms of, these are your bigger aquatic macros. If you're like at the size of your hand, I mean, I don't know. I'm not that familiar with like macros from like Australia, for example, but I would doubt you would see anything that big.
Wow.
Usually by then they've, something that big has a backbone.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. We do have even another question in the chat.
Yeah.
So the question is, thank you so much, but what about international? You don't need at the moment worldwide data? Or can we should train ourselves if we're international? And also, when we sample a macroinvertebrate, should we put them back in the water alive, or how does that work?
Yeah. So let's take the first question. Yes, we need international data. And the reason the MacroBlitz project was piloted for North and South America is that was where our project entomologist had expertise. When we look at how to set up an iNaturalist project, and I don't know, maybe I'll just jump over there real quick so you can kind of follow along. And then I just encourage you to dig into this. Let me go ahead and share a screen again. Okay, you should be seeing the MacroBlitz project on iNaturalist.
Yes.
So, all right, let's not to get, yeah, there's a lot. One of the things that I thought before I started MacroBlitz, that somebody else would have done all this work and then I could just come along and use what they did. And it turns out nobody did. And there's a reason for it. It's that the back end of what you need to set up a project in iNaturalist makes it kind of difficult. So if we take, for example, the nymphs, this main MacroBlitz project has several what are called collection projects. And if you look at the nymphs, the nymph project, I'm going to go ahead and, it's loading slowly. All right, here we go. A collection project on iNaturalist has requirements. And this is when any observation on iNaturalist meets these project requirements, the observation gets added to the project. So specifically, we set up for the nymphs that if any of these observations are made as a nymph in these taxa, if any observations from these taxa as a nymph are made on iNaturalist in this geographic location, it will be added to the project. So adding an observation to an iNaturalist project in mostly is very passive. It's not like you can go ahead and say, oh, I want to add this. That's what's called a traditional project, and that's a whole other thing. It's just if you get it up there and it meets the project requirements for which in this case is taxa and location, it's automatically added. The reason we did not go international is for things like this family level, like the creeping water bugs, and the ripple bugs. I was not 100% sure that this would be inclusive enough of all ecosystems internationally. So if we're looking at in Africa, are there other family taxa that should be included but aren't? We could certainly look at this. You could reach out and we could have a conversation and you could copy this project and then adjust it, get an entomologist who says, well, you really need this one and this one and this one. So that's why we didn't go international. That said, upload the data. Continue to do that no matter where you are of any aquatic macroinvertebrate. And even though it's not in the official MacroBlitz project, you're still in the MacroBlitz ecosystem. And I'll show you how that can happen in a moment. So does that help? Clarify
I
things
think
about.
so. And there was just when we're collecting the macroinvertebrates, generally they survive the process of being collected and
Yes.
kind of being in the plastic container, going into another container like a petri dish to isolate them, photographs, etc. They're usually fine through that. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. You want to be mindful, like if it's a super hot day, don't leave them out in the sun because they respirate aquatic oxygen, dissolved oxygen. And the hotter the water, the lower the oxygen levels get. So I once saw a damselfly chew another damselfly nymph in half, and the one that got chewed in half crawled away. So these are tough little organisms, but you still want to be respectful. I didn't put in my intro. I am an adjunct instructor at a tribal university, Ogallala Lakota College on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And my students and my colleagues really expect us to have a respectful attitude to nature because everything is a relative. So I've developed this with the idea that you go and you respect everything and you treat it well, and then you just gently return it to the water when you're done. Don't just fling it out there. Oops, sorry. So yeah, that's so yes, please return your organisms if your permit allows it. Some places you won't be allowed to. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and this would be mainly in the U.S., would be because you're putting things back in the water. Some places will say that requires another permit to do that. So you would just have to dump them. But that's why you need to know your site.
And we have a comment in the chat from Haley that says that they use a cooler filled with natural water and ice packs and bubblers if the mackerels will be out of the water for a while or if they're being transported to a classroom. So that seems like a really cool way of approaching it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll want to include some vegetation so that they can hide, because what will happen if you transport them is they're voracious predators. This is their time that they're growing and they're feeding. And so you will leave with one population and arrive in your classroom with a different population. So yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
All right. Great conversation, y'all. All right, we have about 10 minutes. Let me think about where we should go next. What would be the most useful to you? Do you want to hear about photographing? Do you want more about iNaturalist? What would be the most useful to you?
Oh. The Haley has 2 comments. She says they also put the big predators in a separate container usually, so they don't eat everyone else, which
Yes.
is smart. And there's an interest in photographing tips.
Okay. Yeah. We can do that. And Antonio, just so you know, I'm seeing your comment there. Yes, Peru is already part of MacroBlitz. But we'll talk about photographing tips. So I just want to see, do most folks have a cell phone that has the capacity to take photos? Is like a smartphone that can be connected to the internet? I read something like the worldwide population has 54% of the people have a smartphone. I know connectivity is an issue in a lot of areas. And so you might just have to take the photos and bring them back to a place and either email them or somehow get them to a computer. All right, let's go ahead and I'll go back to see. Sorry for the scroll roll here. Okay. So we talked about using your phone. So for those of you who do have a phone and your phone camera will be your main macroinvertebrate camera, I've taken most of mine with my phone. This past year, I finally upgraded to what's called an Olympus TG, and I'm still learning how to use that. I'm not very good. I'm only okay with it. So if your phone, and this is true for Android and iPhone, if you turn it over, you could see multiple lenses on the back. And so what you will do to find out which is the best lens for your macroinvertebrate photography, you're going to open your camera app, and then you're going to point it at something up close. And normally I just have people, your finger of a hand. You're going to need both fingers for this. So, but just open your camera app, point it to your fingertips so you can see it's in focus. You can see the ridges of your fingerprint and all that. And in this picture, I had a little rock on a towel. That's a terry cloth towel in the background. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your other finger while your camera is pointing and in focus of your finger. And you are going to cover your lenses one at a time until your camera app looks like this. Now, later version iPhones will immediately switch to another lens, but there is still a dominant macro lens on later versions of iPhones. So I'll give you a moment to try that for those of you who have your cameras at hand.
And I guess if we only have one lens,
Mm-hmm.
then that decision is basically made.
Pretty much. Yes.
And like with a typical iPhone, it will kind of do that refocusing internally.
Yep. Yep. So this is for those of you who've got multiple lenses on your phone. You'll want to know which is the macro lens, because if you choose to put a magnification, like a clip-on lens or the easy macro bands, and I'll show them here. This right here is an easy macro band. And these actually, I think that's what it's called, easy macro something. And it's a rubber band with a magnification lens sort of attached in it. And you just slide it over. And this will, or you seat the magnification lens over your macro lens. And that seems to help. I will say that seems to work best on iPhones. I use a clip-on where I clip it over that lens we've identified as the one being best suited for the magnification clip-on. And then if you have a big program, Tanya Sulikowski out of the New Jersey School of Conservation, she does this. She has these field microscopes, and they have these ocular attachments. So for cell phones. And so you can just put your cell phone in there and then it will take the microscope photo. So there are a couple of different ways. I will say those of you might have, and this is something you can explore on your phone, developing, I will say parenthetically, this part of the program has been the most challenging because there's so many different phones with so many different features. Your phone may also have a macro feature, and it usually is indicated by a little flower. And that is compared to the landscape feature or the portrait feature. So you just have to get in your app and click on what do you have for settings. Like some say food, some will have a macro setting, some won't. If yours has a macro setting, I strongly suggest you deploy it when you're taking photos for MacroBlitz. All right, let's go on to the good photography practices. So I said earlier that most of your photography skills don't really apply, but light is everything in MacroBlitz. You'll want to isolate the organism, and we talked a little bit about that. gear. You're going to get as close as focus will allow. You'll want to take multiple photographs. And for that, I suggest if you are an app user, iNaturalist has an app. I don't use the app for MacroBlitz. I like to take my photos separately and upload them and edit them a little bit. But if you are an app user, take your photos outside of the iNat app. And I saw someone mention earlier about the mosquito protocol. A lot of the same things apply. So I think you take your photos outside of the Globe Observer app, and then you can import them and upload the best ones. And then use the object for scale. And that was the index card. Oh, great. So you'll see here, this is my friend Jen, and she and I went out macro blitzing. And you can see we've set up this little studio, I call it, where she has her organism in shade. And we do this intentionally because what happens normally when you're out on a bright sunny day and you're taking your photos, you'll want to get in super close. But when you do, the phone casts a shadow and your app, your camera app won't be able to adjust the light. So you'll want to sort of even out some of that overexposure to quick underexposure by intentionally underexposing the photo and putting it in shade. And then either once you have it kind of set up in the shade, if you're good with your phone camera, you can kind of adjust the exposure, or you can do it after the fact in an editing in like a Google Photos platform. You want to isolate because, again, when you upload to iNaturalist, every observation on iNaturalist is one organism. You might have 15 different organisms in the photo because that's sometimes how these things roll, but every identification is one. If you're using the app, you upload one organism at a time. Focus. Focus is hard because, like I said, your organism is often moving and you're just going to have to practice. That's one of the reasons you take multiple photos, is because sometimes they'll swim in and out of focus. This I took in burst mode, this little chironomid, and I made a little animation GIF. iNaturalist does not accept video, but they do accept smaller GIFs or GIFs, whatever you prefer. And so if the movement is diagnostic, then it's fun to take a burst mode and make an animation out of it. Yeah. Okay. So that we didn't really get into the uploading to iNaturalist, which is a whole other thing. But basically, you just upload it to iNaturalist. And then if you want to keep it in the MacroBlitz ecosystem, and you can be outside North and South America, after you upload it, you go into your iNaturalist account online. And I'll just show you how to do this real quick before we wrap up here. Let me go ahead and share the I'm going to show you my observations. Show you a recent. So this one, by the way, a thorny-headed worm. It's identifying the parasite inside this scud here. But let me look at this non-biting midge here. That after you upload it, I can't do this for you. You can go in and you can tag it. You can tag it MacroBlitz. And this is only done on the web. You can't do this in the app. And what that does is it brings up everything that was uploaded during a MacroBlitz that people have tagged. And so when that happens, I'm in here a couple of times a week and I'm looking at it to try to get it identified as best as I can. And then there are a group of people who are really good at macros, and they've graciously allowed me to tag them. So that's how we can keep your data in the MacroBlitz ecosystem, even if it's not added to the MacroBlitz project. So with that, yeah, that was the fast and furious overview. Great questions, everyone. And I'm available. Probably the easiest way to get a hold of me is admin@macroblitz.org. I'll put that in the chat. Macroblitz.org. And that goes directly to me. So
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anne. This was exceptionally informative, and I learned so much about something I don't think about a lot, which is really fun.
it's really one of these awe, if you want to bring more awe into your teaching, simply because nobody knows that it's there. And it's like discovering a hidden world.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's really, really fun.
Yeah. So awesome.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending so much. We really appreciate you. We appreciate you watching whenever you do end up watching. And thank you again to Anne.
Yeah. Have a great day and happy macro blitzing.
Bye.
Bye.